Space Forum. This is an important topic, and I think you guys would agree, and why you're spending your evening with us, which thank you for your time tonight. We have a stellar list of experts to explore this topic, and I think you'll find we've taken a unique approach to how we're looking at aging in place. We're trying to take the stigma out of aging and make it more about thriving and living for any age, regardless of if you're have a disability that requires modifications in your home, or you just simply need accessibility and ease within your home. So we're going to direct the conversation to that a little bit tonight, and if you haven't had a chance to look at our report, you'll see that's what we focus on in our report as well. We strongly believe that there is an opportunity to change the dialogue around this and make it more realistic and more appealing for people to want to make these home modifications and think about the things that go into staying in your home as you grow older. HomeAdvisor is a marketplace that connects homeowners with pre-screened professionals to get anything done in their home. So we really do have a pulse at what is happening around this. And what we're finding is that people aren't even really thinking about this. They're not exploring this until they have to. And our goal is to bring this conversation to more mainstream and less of a behind closed door conversation. So appreciate you guys coming tonight, and without further ado, I will let Marianne take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. This is, as Brooke said, we'd really like to shift the dialogue. There's a lot of preconceived notions about aging in place, and the thought bubble for many is grab bars and wheelchair ramps in grandma's house. And none of us want that personally. So, when you and from our report this year, when you ask people, do you want to age in place? The majority say yes. Have you done anything to your house? The answer is no. And so how do you reach a group of people that doesn't want to be in that group of people? And that's the real question. And we have some amazing insights on this panel, and that's really what we're hoping to achieve in this conversation, is flipping that dialogue from the sort of the professionals. I mean, who am I to tell somebody how to prepare to age? I mean, that's ridiculous. But it's not them, it's us. From so much of the conversation, it's like, well, how will they age in place? How will they? No. How will we? How will we all? And whether it's us personally or parents, we all have to deal with that. And it becomes an opportunity to do something better than just this sort of last minute punitive thing that's just a process and part of a holistic at all ages dialogue. So I'll introduce our panel. We have Brad Hunter. He is the chief economist for HomeAdvisor. We have Matthias Hallwich. He is the partner and co-founder of Hallwich Kushner, and also if you should have all received his book. There's a stack of them out there. They're amazing, called New Aging, which is fantastic. He's going to talk a little about that. We have Deborah Pierce, who is an architect and author as well. Her book is the Accessible Home, and it really dives into how you do this. Finally, we have Dan DeClerico. He's a senior home editor at Consumer Reports and the co-author of the Just Right Home. So it's just amazing insights here. I'll dive in. I'm going to start with Brad. What are some of the economic and demographic reasons why we should be looking at this?
You can think of about 40 million reasons, and that's the number of people that are age 65 and over. But going beyond just the number, and we're all aware that the over 85 group is growing faster than other age groups, and everyone's well familiar with those statistics. But the interesting thing to think about is the economics that are involved. It costs, say, $3,000 a month to have somebody in an assisted living facility, $7,000 or more per month for a nursing facility. And the elderly don't have the income or the wealth typically to support a lengthy stay like that. And for example, the median wealth for people aged 55 to 64 is $143,000. And that includes the value of their home, which is the vast majority of that. You take that out and you're left with about $45,000. So there's not a lot of room there. On top of just the expense, which is enough to motivate us to want to live independently at home, there's also the caregiver gap. there's just the projections from the AARP study show that there won't be enough people, either family or non-family, to take care of the people that that are going to be reaching, into their 70s and 80s in the next few years.
Deborah, I wonder if you could elaborate on this. I know you've done a lot of work with sort of demographics and looking at this, and you've talked about the lifespan changing and adulthood too. If you could talk about that a little bit.
Hi, is this working? Is it turned on?
Yes.
Hello, can you hear? Yeah, I read everything I can get my hands on. I'm sort of geeky about demographics, and the census is really great reading, and MetLife statistics and AARP. But in particular, what Marianne was mentioning, there's a book by Mary Catherine Bateson, and she's the daughter of Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson, both anthropologists, and she's an anthropologist too. And she says, we've prolonged life. The population, the life expectancy is extended by 30 years in the last century of the last millennium, and 20 years since World War II. So if you kind of project that, that means it's going to be, even in the next 25 years, will be extending by another 20 or 25 years. So our kids' generation, our grandkids' generations, they're going to be living well over 100. And so what does that mean? Does that mean that we're going to have a population of people, more and more people at the very end of their lives? Not really, because we're living better, we're healthier, we're intellectually engaged. There's a lot more understanding about how to live well. People are socially connected. And so she describes what Mary Catherine Bateson, what she calls adulthood 2, which is this new generation between when the kids leave and people are empty nesting and when they're truly old. So this is the period that in past generations would have been looking at retirement. Now they're really looking at the quality of their lives and how they can live a really satisfying, active couple of decades. And a lot of my clients are at this stage, no one's really thinking about getting old. And I'm trying to get some universal design ideas on the table and to deal with that kind of general resistance that I think everybody has. We tend to look at houses, whether as an architect or a homeowner or a builder, from what we know. And we think that the way it's always been is the way it's going to be. No, this is really the time. This is a very exciting time because I think everyone is really starting to look at how it can be different and better, how we can build from what we've known in the past.
It's an important point, the resistance. And I think that part of it is, like you were saying, Marianne, thinking of grab bars, those ugly aluminum bars, and the wheelchair ramps and things like that. But people have a bit of a stigma associated with aging in place. They don't want to think about it. There's two parts to that. There's the self-image part. They don't want to consider themselves old. They say, in fact, we did our own survey, and people said primarily they haven't done any home improvement related aging in place because they're not old yet and because they're not disabled yet. But it's important to take steps before you get to those stages, right? But the other aspect besides self-image is thinking about their property value. People that think in terms of, will somebody consider this house less appealing to them if they see these kinds of ugly improvements in there. So I think the important thing to keep in mind is that there are things that we can do with our homes that create a broader appeal. Things that would help anybody. Pull-out shelves is an example. Lazy Susans, doorknobs that are the lever style instead of the harder to grab typical doorknob. Voice activation systems for controlling the environment in the home. Those kinds of things, the younger generation thinks that's just cool, smart home technology, and it certainly would not be a negative to anyone. It could actually be a positive to the value of the property.
Exactly. Well, and I think that builds, Mateus, on some of the things you were saying. And I'd love if you could just explain how you got involved with this topic and why. Why did you write your book? Because this ties really brilliantly to that point.
Yeah, so I actually just realized when a couple of years ago, when I was 39, that I had surpassed 50% of my life expectancy as an average German male. And by that, I actually woke up and I looked into the future. And as an architect, I looked into the future, what we as a society offer to our older members. And we see retirement communities, assisted living facilities, and nursing homes, which are fantastic, right? I mean, retirement communities is like resort living that you have deserved after really hard work, and you do that for like a month. It's fun, right? Resort living, but then it's a year, then it's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30, 40 years, right? Today, the reality is that some people live in these retirement communities for 40 years. Then you have assisted living facilities. I love assistants, right? Nothing better than that. The problem is that we put just old people in assisted living facilities. We should mix it up, right? I want to have assistants, and we give also assistance to older people. But what we do as a society, we actually segregate, right? And we all know by now, finally, segregation is wrong. Racial segregation is wrong, sexual segregation is wrong, and age segregation is wrong. So that's the next frontier, which we really have to get aware and change. And I do see two different ways how we can do it. The first one is that everyone above 40 declares himself old early, get it over with, and finally look into the future and see what you really should do with the second part of your life, including these early adjustments in your living environment, because these become really traps if you're not aware of them and you don't change them. The alternative is also that we look at older people and actually see that they are actually pioneers, because older people come to a point in life where nobody alive has ever been. It's a pioneering effort, so we should embrace it and support it, and that does also hopefully change that kind of stigma of, oh, an old person becomes less capable and becomes basically a burden to society. It's quite the opposite, because it's a pioneer that deserves all the kind of support from us. And when you now create a pioneering home for your own self in your own future, suddenly it has an amazing resale value because it's a novel thing.
That's fantastic. Well, speaking of resale value, that actually was perfectly into Dan. And you've had 20 years in the home category, shelter category, talking about and researching and writing about housing. And you were talking about how you've seen this topic evolve and what that has looked like. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, man. So I'm 42, so I'm very old. But yeah, I've been covering remodeling and home products for the better part of 2 decades. So yeah, it's interesting to sort of offer the perspective of the journalist who's been covering this issue for most of those years. I can't think of a year, in that time when there wasn't at least one piece of content that hit on, the issue of aging in place. I was kind of, when Marianne invited me to join the panel here, I sort of, thought back over all those stories. And I think the first one that I did from the early 2000s, this was before Consumer Reports. I was at a magazine called Home, which isn't even around anymore. But it was a great story. It was about a war vet who had suffered an injury, was in a wheelchair as a result. Awesome story of how the community sort of came around him. A contractor volunteered his time in his company, and they totally redid his house, and we focused on the bathroom. And again, it was a great story. I'm very proud of it. But in hindsight, I realized I sort of came at this issue through a fairly narrow lens. We spoke, for example, of it was a universal design bathroom. That was the term back then. Within a few years, maybe by the time I reached Martha Stewart Living, which was my next job, we had solidly moved into sort of the aging in place terminology in there, especially at Martha Stewart. It was a lot about the aesthetics and making it beautiful. Fast forward, I looked at the very last piece that Consumer Reports did just from this year. And there we quoted a remodeler who was using the term visitability, which I think is sort of an effort, kind of to Brad's point, to sort of distance yourself from it. It's not about my own mortality. It's about making sure that people visiting my home are able to, to use it. But that's all to say that there really has been this evolution, which on the one hand, I think is very positive. It shows that we're sort of thinking through and kind of grappling with this. On the other hand, I think it's been difficult for consumers to sort of coalesce around the whole idea, because it sort of the name keeps changing and sort of the terms of it keep changing. As evidence of that, every year Consumer Reports does a real estate based survey with the benefit of a national research center, so we can do these nationwide surveys, much like you guys. But this one was on millennials, who of course have become the biggest buying cohort. So we wanted to know what characteristics they were most interested in. So one question went, direct to that. What are the home features that you value most? So, smart technology, energy efficiency, things like that. But we did ask about aging in place. Does anyone want to guess what percentage came back with aging in place? Zero. Exactly zero. Which on the one hand is sort of disheartening, but when you kind of drill down into the data, the things that they were most interested in, sort of modern, updated kitchen, not surprisingly, was number one. But flexible, open floor plans, that's very important. Low maintenance materials, and when you start to sort of process that and think about it, you realize that's all aging in place. We don't call it that, and they didn't call it that, but they want it as much as anybody. And I'll just bring one last data point. This actually isn't ours, but this is from a Bank of America survey, first-time homebuyers, which really struck me. 75% of them said that they would rather delay or bypass the starter home to make their first home a home that they could be in for a long time. So that really, Marion, that's no surprise to you. You've been talking about the paradigm shift. But I think, again, it just shows that we are sort of all in this together, even if we're not calling it the same thing.
Well, that's you were just going to say that.
Yeah, so we work with large-scale developers. One of our biggest projects is 1,800 apartments, and we now introduce really this idea of just intergenerational living, with the argument that right now we have 15% of the population is above 65, in 30 years 30%. So if you as a developer with a building that's going to last hopefully for more than 50 or 100 years, don't do the right things for all generations, then you basically have a product that's not going to be good for the market in the future. And when you think about intergenerational, then you have to offer basically your dimensions and the appliances to accommodate every age. And that's kind of for us now the way in, how we can actually push through lots of ADA designed bathrooms and different designed kitchens without saying that this is aging in place. It's also not for senior living, it's just for intergenerational living so that everyone can live there all life long. And so with that, there's like an in that also doesn't have a marketing problem.
Deborah, I wondered if you could talk about their experience of living in a home, because it's very similar. If you had the intergenerational, you would have had the experience you had when you became injured with your shoulder.
Yeah, I'm kind of klutzy, and I've had some bad falls, just kind of throwing myself around, and had the shoulder dislocated a couple times. I broke a wrist, and I had another shoulder that I had pulled a torn tendon or ligament, I don't know. And so through all these surgeries, over the last, that was about a 10-year period. Goodness, I think I'm over with it. But each of them caused me to look at the house as though I had a disability, right? Because I did. It was temporary, but each was a big aha moment. I couldn't turn doorknobs. I couldn't open jar lids. I couldn't lift a heavy cast iron skillet. I couldn't turn on the water. The faucets were really hard. And so thank goodness that happened. I was a good person for that to happen to. The point is that we never know when injury could occur. And when it does, people are generally not in the position to make smart decisions, to spend money, to invest in the kind of disruption that a renovation project can cost. And so, yes, visitability is really important, but also I think our homes really need to be able to serve us throughout the lifespan. Interestingly, that I'm talking to an architect out in Oregon who is looking at things from the standpoint of families with young children, and she's talking the same kind of talk. She's saying, I want doors wide enough so that my kids can ride their tricycles in the house, and I want counters that are low enough that they can pull up a stool and help me in the kitchen, and I want to have space underneath the counters for their needs. And these are the sort of things that, whether you call it universal design, whether you call it aging in place, whether you call it accessibility, it's really the way people are looking at living. And I think maybe there's just a little denial, but I think there's also readiness for these ideas because it's now seen as just good design. Open airy spaces, open living plan, everybody likes that. Kitchens that are kind of easy to maintain, easy to use, easy to maintain. Drawers that have all kinds of little bells and whistles and soft closed doors, and bathrooms that have wall-mounted appliances or wall-mounted fixtures. It's just easier to clean the floor and get around in those spaces. So I think what we call it is important. And I think that's what we're here tonight to say. What is this? We're trying to get our hands around, get our minds around. It's the best I think we've come up with this universal design, but I actually like the term inclusive design better. People always wonder, what does universal mean? If it's for everybody, is it really good for anyone? And then when I kind of came to this, I was thinking, what's a kitchen for somebody who can't see? What's a bathroom for somebody who can't hear? What kind of refrigerator would somebody who's maybe a little mentally confused going to be able to use? What kind of hardware is best for someone who can't use their hands? If a person has no upper body strength, grab bars aren't really the answer, right? And so the idea of inclusive design means that I think it speaks to the actual needs of people with a variety of interests. And I think that means we talk about what do men want, what do women want, what people with disabilities want, what do young people want, old people, Germans, Lithuanians. So that's the word I like for it.
I'm at our view that it's just good design even. My sort of favorite analogy is to the OXO Good Grips, which I suspect everybody in this room has some sort of Good Grips product. Those were designed by a man whose wife had arthritis and couldn't turn the can opener. So he redesigned it so she could use it. Well, I use it. I don't have an old person product in my house. I have a product that is good design. And, so Matthias, you were actually talking about how you can sort of check your house in certain ways and adapt your house by seeing what things work. I wonder if you could, like the suitcase, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Totally, it's a really easy way. So if you go travel or if you don't go travel, I'm sure you have a suitcase on a roller and just walk around in the house for a day with that roller and see how easy it is or how difficult, and also go into the bathroom with it. Test it out. You go to bed with it. You will detect all of these little things. And it could be one step that's a deal breaker, and that step needs to go.
Yeah, it allows you then to get an idea of where the pitfalls might be. I'd like to pivot the conversation and start talking a little bit about technology and smart home, because that's another area where something that is good design for today and a great product for today may have a secondary use as in this demographic. Maybe if you start us out, Brad, talking a little bit about the shifts you're seeing there.
Well, we've already talked about people being resistant to aging in place or whatever nomenclature you want to use, but there's also another type of resistance, which is tech resistance. And of course, people that are in their 60s and 70s have a different relationship with technology than people in their 40s and 50s. And so normally there's this adoption curve that we always face with any kind of technology. So, great example, just in common usage would be the iPhone is in common use throughout the whole population, but it wasn't at first. And now the iWatch is out there, but it's only being used by the sort of, technocratic, early adopters. So we started out with certain, voice controlled lighting and things like that, and the high-tech refrigerators that they have today. They can have cameras to show you what's in the refrigerator and whether the milk's gone bad yet, and things like that. And then, so you go from the early adopter to the broader population, and that's when things really start to take off and take hold. And then finally, the last is typically the elderly. But what's happening to a degree, and it's increasing, is this leapfrog effect, where the elderly are being helped by their kids, people in their 30s and 40s and 50s who have parents in their 70s, 80s, and 90s are buying the technologies and installing them, setting them up for their parents in a lot of cases. And we're expecting to see that sort of continue to really leapfrog that adoption cycle. And interestingly, we've done a study at HomeAdvisor where we found that daughters are actually 4 times as likely to be the purchaser than sons for whatever reason. And so, but anyway, that just confirms that that is taking hold. It's still relatively small, but it's growing.
Dan, could you build on this?
Yeah. We talked a little bit about this earlier, and I guess I take a not an anti-technology view, but I see, and we see in our labs often a lot more value in the low tech. So putting together a list. I'll open with a very mundane example, sort of purposefully with flooring. We recently got porcelain tile floors into our labs. They're sort of, having a little bit of a moment. A lot of designers like the look of them. And they totally crushed it in our tests in terms of their durability, dent resistance, scratch resistance. But I think the nicest thing about them is the textured finish, which makes for a more, a sort of anti-slip slip resistant surface. So, it's a small example, but the point I kind of want to make is it's really important to get the products and the materials right, in addition to the smart design, of course, before you go for the connected refrigerator, for example. And I know you weren't advocating for that, but we actually did. That was a Samsung. It's been a tough couple of weeks for Samsung, so I don't want to pile on too much, but we got the Samsung Family Hub into our labs. And the level of impracticality was kind of shocking. So unfortunately, I think the high tech stuff gets a lot of attention. It's fun, it's sexy, it's it's a lot more fun to talk about than a porcelain tile floor. And yet, I wouldn't want us, the community, to lose sight of those very practical things that need to be part of the overall design.
But there are some kind of technology components that start to make a huge difference. Not directly in the house, but for example, Uber. It's magical, and the self-driving car are going to be even better because lots of older people are trapped in suburbia, losing their driving license, losing mobility, and with that having to make really hard choices. Or for example, Blue Apron. I was the first one signing up because it's an amazing service that you get ingredients delivered to your house. And I never cooked and now I cook because it's so convenient. But then for all the people where maybe the trip to the supermarket is hard, now they get the ingredients and they can maintain some of their independence and also the joy of cooking. And I see that there's actually, through technology, not in that kind of gadget world, but I think into really resilient service provision, huge opportunities that can come in. I think we're at a very early time of it, and I'm really curious what will unfold in the future.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to what both Matthias and Dan have said, I think that there is a unmet need to, giving your Samsung example and so on, unmet need to consolidate and educate. I think that there are all these companies that are offering, the learning thermostats that learn your patterns and the hubs and the smart refrigerators and all that. But I think that probably there's a need for a company to just tie it all together and be sort of a one-stop shop and a one-stop education hub for these people too, especially for the older people, but also just for the younger people who may not know how to tie it all together. So I think there's probably a multi-billion-dollar opportunity out there for that, and just to kind of tie it all together.
Can I weigh in on technology? There are so many ways that technology could be better and could fit in our homes. We look at communication technology, entertainment technology, mechanical systems, HVAC technology, even plumbing systems and direct vent heaters and tankless heaters, and then there's technology in terms of home health, personal monitoring, personal care monitoring. There's biometric hardware and technology that's from the security industry that's affecting how we make the doorknobs and the locks and things that are in our houses. And none of these are really talking with each other, just as Brad is saying. And I think the technology changes so often, and there are also people who service one device aren't necessarily communicating with another device. And so it's an area with huge growth potential. And interestingly, in my book, we have 25 different homes that were designed with people who have severe disabilities. No one is going for high tech. Everyone is going for, as Dan is saying, the kind of easy to understand. You don't want something that could break because you'll really be in trouble. And so I think we have these two trends going. We're going to have more highly technical homes, or we're going to find ways to have it simpler. And I think to Eddie's, in either regard, the simpler it gets, I think the more effective it'll be and the more frequently it's being used.
There's actually an idea of simplicity, which is a big flaw, especially in America. It's basically the loss of social contacts between people. And when you look into statistics, 50% of people in nursing homes are there because of social deficits and not because of physical deficits. That means like a partner passes, they move closer to family, family is overburdened, they go into a nursing home. So if we can actually also rethink our neighborhoods and our buildings to connect people again, to create that kind of social glue, that makes all the difference. Because if a neighbor helps with shopping, or maybe swings by or sees when the curtain is not pushed over and says like, hey, is everything okay? All of these kind of things we can solve with technology, but we can also solve it with social context around us. We're working with a company that's called WeWork on the future of living for the millennials, which is called WeLive. And they're looking into the reduction of size to save money, but also to highly socialize these buildings. The first one has opened here on Wall Street. There's also one in Crystal City in Washington, D.C., and they're incredible successful. And we just built our prototype on the top floor here in Wall Street, and every time I go into the elevator, everyone talks to me. And I go into my apartment building where I live with another 700 apartment units, and I have never talked to one of my neighbors. So there's a magic of design that can unfold all the potential, and that can happen in suburbia, that can happen in city centers, it can happen in apartment buildings, but we just have to look into them with different eyes again. And actually looking through the lens of older people can really create an incredible new revisit of typologies for the better of everyone.
Tying it back into economics and property values and things that are involved that way. Your kind of philosophy about designing communities it bears fruit in the marketplace too. If you think of in Florida, we have Century Village, and there's the communities that when they first sold these condo units to people, everyone was 55. You had to be 55 to live there. That was the rule. And now everybody there is 85. And the property values have plummeted in those communities. So because of that lack of diversity. And so when you lack diversity, sometimes it's negative economically too.
Yeah, it really comes down to feeling like the solution to an aging in place or shifting to a sort of more thriving place is at all ages. And when we get good design across that, you start to meet the needs of everyone while we're hitting these individual groups. Since we're getting closer to the end here, I'd love to cover one more time and talk about some international case studies. I know you've had sort of some thoughts on how there's some differences between what's happening here in the U.S. and things you can draw from abroad, and Deborah, you as well. You start with this.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting to see that some countries are dealing better with it. Some of them have very traditional family ties that are still intact, but these places become less and less present. I think Europe has partially still good relationships, but you also see that actually in Europe there's a much stronger awareness about aging and a more global discourse and conversation. So, for example, in the Netherlands now, they offered students to move into nursing homes for free if they spend 20 hours socializing with their peers or within the community. And every bed is taken because students love it. It's cheap. They can be social. They learn something from the older people, and that is like you can ignite that kind of relationship again. Other places try to also really bring in that kind of diversity again and make sure that maybe not the traditional family bonds work, but at least choosing family bonds, which could be friends, it could be other neighbors, that's much more strong. But you do see also in places like, for example, South Korea and China, you see a rapid aging, but also the society has not accumulated enough wealth so that it becomes very dangerous for many people to go into under poverty level. That you have, I think, 30% of people above 65 in South Korea are below the poverty level, and that's happening. And I think in America we're lucky that it's actually a country of immigrants because it really keeps the diversity of ages stronger than most other modernized countries. But we have to use it as an opportunity to really work with that and find that glue between the generations again.
Deborah, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, there really are many different approaches around the world to this issue that we're talking about. A lot of robotics going on in Japan, and Korea is the most wired country on earth. They're building cities where the coordination between what happens in the home and what happens in public transportation in the office is almost seamless, so it makes it very easy for people to get around and get where they need to be on time with a limited minimal disruption. You're seeing some things that exoskeletons are something that's being developed in Japan and perhaps in other parts of the world. So I think as we're looking at aging, we've got these two kind of racing trains dealing with it. One is the medical world and how they're looking at this, and the other, I think, is the design world and policy world. And are we're creating homes that are more, and environments that are motivated by the ADA, that are easy for people to get around, and at the same time, maybe there will be people won't be using the wheelchairs in the future. So I think we're really at a very exciting time, and that there's wisdom and creativity in different parts of the world that will all inform what happens here.
Yeah, can I jump in? It's a really interesting question. I hadn't thought about it, but from a product perspective, it is a lot of the European manufacturers. We've talked a lot about having some reports about the hands-free kitchen. So Mila, I was talking earlier about this, the dishwasher that opens with a knob. That's it's a little more ergonomic, easier to operate. Cabinets that are motion centered, and it's like a valve format. That's a good term, right? Yeah. So it does seem to be a lot of European influence. But with the robotics, that's a great point as well. And their Roomba, the robotic vacuum, which is American, so it's not that we're being outmaneuvered on every turn, but there is maybe a little more innovation coming in from Europe and other parts of the world.
I just want to mention something that I heard about Korea. A lot of things going on in South Korea haven't made their way over to here, but they're developing floors that are sensory, and that if a person falls or their gait changes walking across the floor will call 911. And walls that can also hear the person's speech is slurred. If they're not talking to anybody else for a while, there might be a call to a neighbor or a family member who can check in to see whether the person's all right or having a stroke. But I think there's just it's a very exciting time.
Excellent. Well, we're getting close. I wonder if you could each maybe sort of have a final thought of how do we cross this boundary? You know, we sort of to come full circle. We've got this demographic that's saying that this is what we want to do. And it's at arm's length because there is a stigma. How do we cross? What's the next step? How do we reach out and sort of integrate some of these good design elements as aging in place? You know, when we asked in our survey, are you doing aging in place product or changes? The answer was no. But I suspect if we actually looked in people's homes and they'd done a renovation of a kitchen, to your point, Dan, it would have been an aging in place elements of it because it's the pull-out drawers, it's the lever handles. There are elements that you can do. So there's part of it is a divide that actually people are preparing, they don't even know it. And part of it is that there's still that distance. So what are your takeaways? How do we advance this conversation?
Let me start by kind of adding to what you were just saying, which is that there are several economic reasons why people should start to, and I think it's an education thing, and just kind of getting them to get past the stigma. If they start making these plans early, and Deborah, you pointed out this with your personal situation with your shoulder injuries, if you wait too long, you can really get kind of boxed in and miss an opportunity. So I think that starting early allows them to avoid wasting money and time with suboptimal solutions that they haven't really thought through carefully because they had to rush. It may also avoid them having to leave their home because they just don't have the time to wait to get some new improvements and modifications put in. And then, as we talked about, there are ways that you can actually enhance the resale value of the home, but you have to do that thoughtfully. So you have to do it early so you can plan it. And then the last point I wanted to make, and coming again from my background as an economist, we think about the fact that mortgage rates are extremely low now, and they're going to go higher in the future. We know that. And how's that going to affect things? Well, it occurs to me that a lot of people may choose to stay in place for that reason too. In other words, mortgage rates at 3.5%, somebody's got a 30-year fixed mortgage. In 3, 4, 5 years, it might be 5%, 6%, and that monthly payment could be significantly higher. Now, people that are faced with that choice 3 or 4 years down the line may say, I really can't get past this idea that if I sell and even buy a house of the same value, my monthly payment's going to go higher. So I'm going to improve the house that I have. And there's also the aspect of at their age, they may not be able to get another mortgage. So they may, for that reason, say, I'm just going to stay in the house that I have because I have not only a mortgage, but I also have a mortgage with a fantastic lifetime low mortgage rate. So those are kind of the backdrop that I wanted to paint.
Excellent. Matthias?
I find it ironic that age discrimination is still accepted, and it's ultimately a discrimination against ourselves. And I think that is really also a problem, right? If we don't do these changes, we put ourselves up for failure. So that kind of awareness is important, but we also know that it's triggered by fear and by denial. So as a designer, we have to basically start to redesign our environments without branding it for seniors, and it just needs to become the status quo for everything. And that's what we have to measure ourselves against. Because when you look at the very successful products for older people, the Mini Cooper, right? The average of the driver is much higher than for BMW, but they designed it for young people. Happen older people like it because there's a big door. Right? So these kind of things, let's just be smart about it, surprise people with incredible products, incredible architecture and interior design, that now it's looks through the lens of older people, but it's really great for everyone.
I have to say, I think the sky's the limit, and there's so many ways that we all in our various labs can have an impact on this. There's an organization called Dialogue in the Dark, and they travel around and set up facilities in different cities. I've experienced it here in New York, where they simulate the experience of being blind and walking through the city. Central Park, through the grocery store, crossing a busy street with lots of traffic. I think anytime we can put ourselves in the shoes of somebody else, we develop compassion. and we develop empathy, and that's going to make us more effective, whatever we do, whether we're designers or whether we're a resident or running a nursery school or an educator. I see a lot of promise in this idea of changing zoning so that towns are more amenable to different kinds of house. Townhouses is still the norm in many cities, but there are actually about 12 cities around the country, Tempe, Arizona, Bolingbrook, Illinois, Atlanta, Georgia, that require any new construction has to be visitable. Because if it's not, all of us have a 19% chance in our lifetime of becoming mobility impaired, assuming that we're all living long enough. But when you take the family and friends of anybody, that pretty much affects everybody. So when towns are revising their zoning codes, this is a time for all of us as just residents and concerned citizens to get involved. So that's what I see. There's so many fronts I'm working on this. And one of the big ones is just to have the medical professionals and the rest of us, and I think in particular the building industry, to be talking with each other, because we're really all talking about the same thing, how to help people.
Yeah, I was just going to make that point. The encouraging thing is we're all in agreement, right? It's not so it comes, back to the messaging. I was reading an article earlier today, and this was sort of marketing. The writer was kind of showing the frustration with all the attention that's lavished on millennials, and she was making the case that there are the characteristics of the millennials that are often, touted, the technology and their inclusiveness and all these wonderful things. Obviously people of all ages, have those. So she was struggling for a new term, perennial. That is what she ended up with. So, I don't know if that's going to stick or not. But yeah, right. But in any event, I think it does come back to the name. A thriving place, I think, is a definite step in the right direction. But it's simply smart design. I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. Smart design.
Excellent. Well, we'd like to open up for any questions at this point. Any questions from the audience?
So what's the best way to get the message out to the individuals that need the help or the improvements to the living conditions for aging in place?
Well, I feel like I'm in a good position, and Consumer Reports is in a good position. So that's why I'm delighted again to be here. So thank you again and to meet you all. So hopefully the relationships with being part of this community. I can do my small part.
Then beyond that, I think the next step is for businesses to realize that there's a missed opportunity right now. We're still in this weird, especially with the high-tech aspects of it, this weird compatibility adjustment, beta tapes went away, VHS prevailed, but for a while there was this battle where you had to do different formats. And I think the same thing is going on, like the Amazon Echo. Not every automated thermostat or lighting system is at all compatible with it. You have to be a real tech wizard to figure out a workaround to get them to talk to each other. And so those things will get worked out as time goes on. But I think that, again, I think it's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity for a company that can figure out a way to really integrate all these and also do some hand-holding and go out to their customer base. I'm a big believer in the free market system. So, if we can get these companies to realize that it's in their financial interest to go out and reach out to the people that are either their end users or the children of their end users and help them to get where they need to get and figure out how to integrate the system and get to the solutions that they need. I think that's probably, to me, one of the biggest steps.
I think that's really the point of the industry-led, and also the fact that this is a huge demographic. This is a huge economy in itself. That we're not serving. It's a great opportunity to increase your business if you're in the business of, either design or even within real estate. All of the categories can be addressed by offering services that are targeted, but within the sort of larger good design. It's good design not just for those people, but for all of us. And when that conversation can start, then hopefully, more professionals are able, if you're hiring a designer, if you're hiring an architect to come in and look at your home, if you're hiring a pro to come in and renovate, that that's part of it, is that getting the industry up to speed. So when professionals come in your home, they're able to help you go through that. And that is, I think at the moment, we're not there yet. That's, we're ramping up to that point where more professionals, real estate professionals, design professionals, construction professionals are able to offer those services. I know, Deborah, you've been a pioneer here, so maybe you can speak to that.
I just wanted to mention this. Do you know why outlets are 16 inches off the floor? That's the height of a hammer. And in the past, people would know where to go looking, the electrician would know where to go looking for the outlets, so that you could fix things just by looking at that level around the house. Well, that's just a difficult height for people to use. And so I think just to kind of rethink all of our assumptions is really important. I've been talking to some people in real estate in Chicago area, and they said, the MLS listing doesn't have anything about a universal design or accessible home. You can get a home for 3-car garage, or you can look for a home with 4 bedrooms with bathrooms, but you can't find a house that's accessible. And so I think the more we can do to destigmatize the normal range of human conditions, the closer we are to an environment and a world where everyone is welcomed.
Yeah, it's knowing the questions to ask and having it be societally accepted. And we're not there yet, but we're getting there. I think that's the interesting thing in doing this work over the last couple of years, is we've seen the number of nonprofits that are available. The resources are all actually out there. It's just one person does this really well, one group does this really well. It's all separated, and it's not yet coalesced to the point that you can go to a hub and get all of the information you need. So the experts are all there, but they don't even, in some cases, know they're experts on that field, and sometimes they do, but they'll be very niche. We were talking to one of the HomeAdvisor pros, who'll actually be in the video that we're about to screen. And we were talking to him about the work that he does. And he was, it was interesting. He's called in at very sort of extreme things, but there was so much more he offered that people didn't even know to call this guy. It was that there was a disconnect between all of these resources, and he was then sort of this very niche thing. So he was working with the heavy lifts and all of that. And he's at the deep extreme, but he also offers this really wide range for people that don't need that. Because a lot of times the disability, only 1% of the US population is in a wheelchair. And yet a lot of times we think about these sort of the big turn radiuses, but there's so many other things we need in a home if you might be a little unbalanced, if you might have some cognitive issues. There's so many other, just the arthritis, all of the other issues that seem less important, but are actually the major market. And that's actually where the opportunity lies as well. Yes.
I just wanted to comment a little bit about sort of branding and labeling and calling it good design or universal design or multi-generational. I think it's really important for us to develop a professional terminology that works and is understood the same way by other people. Because the danger of calling it good design, I think of it as why people responded negatively to saying all lives matter when people said Black lives matter. Because if you just say good design, it doesn't mean anything to anybody. And universal design, which is a terminology that I sort of grew in the industry with, is good, but was never really made it past a certain threshold the way, say, green design did.
Right.
So I think as the leaders in this area of thinking, we need to hash it out and come up with something that, the average person, the average American who first time thinks about a special condition immediately knows that it's that. Because people don't even know what design is. So we have a long way to go.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Can I make a joking comment? So when people come to me and they say like, oh, you have heard about sustainability, and do you guys have LEED certification in Germany? And I'm like, no, we have laws. We have to be sustainable, otherwise you're not allowed to build the building. Maybe you should also really think into like applying actually just into some of our codes requirements, which actually have happened, right? In New York, apartment buildings need to be ADA, and it's not negotiable. Every bathroom needs to be ADA at this point. So these kind of directions, I think it's actually really good to add some force to it, and that it's not choice anymore.
It's been a long time since ADA.
I mean, the distinction between ADA and the building codes, the ADA, buildings don't have to meet ADA, they have to meet the building code to get a building permit. But if they don't allow people to get around freely, then you sue them under the ADA. So the ADA is enforced by the Justice Department, and the building codes are enforced by, that, of course, but I'm just like, even within this field, there's slightly different requirements and different jurisdictions. And just like the smart home, I think we're talking about, we're not always on the same platform. At least we're talking.
Yeah. Well, that's part of it. I mean, that's a big part of it, because there is such a stigma that you have to try and figure out how to talk about it before we can get over the stigma to then get to the next results.
Because universal design came so closely on the heels of accessible design, people think, oh yeah, well, you're just talking about for people with severe disabilities. And that's not quite true. And so I've heard a lot of people in the profession saying, what is the word? Lifespan housing, life cycle housing, lifespan, maybe that kind of makes sense. Doesn't really talk to the issue of communities, but I think we have to keep brainstorming on this one. What names do you like?
You had said one before that was
Inclusive?
Inclusive, I thought was good. I think there's a lot of things I don't like about some of the other titles. I'm not sure inclusive quite captures it, but it might work if it was prevalent enough to gain a real understanding. And I think of it as, you want it to be non-ageist housing.
I have a new idea. How about we call it housing, and all the other ones are called insufficient housing? Go the other way. Yeah, because I think it's actually
Well, I mean, I think you say it in a comedic way, but it's in a way it's really true, and it's in how does the word get out so that you really have to use the negative terminology about all the failures enough that it becomes an assumption that, the best, coolest housing is, of course, intergenerational and accessible and has up-to-date technology, etc. So,
yeah, I always say that actually, so architecture, what we do today, we're very lucky as architects that we have people who are mostly healthy because they overcome all the flaws that we have designed. Right, we can jump over a step and we can move a door and so on, but it's just covering our flaws. So we have to be honest with us, so that actually a real good building is ready for everyone. And so maybe we should start to shame the ones which don't comply.
Excellent.
All right, so you said, maybe I missed it, Dan was going to focus on the coolest high-tech products ready for prime time. Did I miss it?
No, you didn't. So we have to go back through my mental notes. Induction cooking was was on the list. Another example of a product that really excels in our testing that I think has the added value that what we're talking about. There's the safety component since the cooktop remains cool. I was going to bring in Alexa as, I think, an excellent example of, incredible potential for everything that we're talking about, the ability to control everything in the home through voice activation. The Roomba vacuum, another example, because I think it provides a platform. Not only is the vacuum itself getting better, but I think we're going to see incredible growth in robotics in the home, everything from caregiving in ways that we haven't fully sort of figured out or even understood, but those were some of the examples. LED lighting certainly is in there. The focus is on the energy efficiency and the longevity, but LED light bulbs are far and away the best light bulbs in our tests now, and they have the advantage of being able to bring so much more light into the home as vision becomes more and more impaired.
And the lighting, of course, is definitely ready for prime time, and even putting motion sensors on the light that's near the stairs or near the bathroom so that people don't stumble or trip when it's dim light. And then kind of on the other end of the spectrum, what's sort of ready for prime time, but we're still kind of waiting to see, is the smart refrigerators. And the interesting concept there is, let's suppose that the parents are in one part of the country and the adult children are living in another part of the country. They could look at their iPhone and look at the contents of the refrigerator and see that there's food in there and that it's not going rotten and it's not the same food that was there 10 or 15 days ago, things like that. That I think is cool, and I think it's very useful, and it would be great if everyone could afford to spend $5,000 or $6,000 on a refrigerator, but it's probably not ready for prime time in terms of broad use just because of the expense. But I was curious, Dan, what you thought of that type of product, or if you looked at that in your studies.
Yeah, no, sure. The connected appliances, I did mention the Samsung. There were some issues with it. The response time on the touchscreen, for example, was certainly not anywhere near ready for prime time. But yeah, connected appliances, we're seeing more wall ovens and ranges that can be controlled from your iPhone. It raises, quite frankly, it raises some safety issues for us. And there are safeguards that they say, they can prevent you from turning your oven on with, smartphone in your pocket. But for the moment with the smart home, we're more focused on the smaller items in the home. I don't think major appliances, they talk about smart, the diagnostics, being able to, fix your washing machine. In theory, that there's some benefit there, but a little more focused on the smaller scale.
Can I just weigh in a little bit?
Yeah.
A lot of my clients are people that are the second or third project that I'm doing with them, and now they're looking at getting older in their homes. And so visibility, things that are easy to see and make it easy to hear are really important. And that's also good universal design because everybody wants to be able to see and hear. But generally that means Google lighting, natural lighting, and artificial lighting. But so some favorite products, dishwashers that have shower drawers so that it's a double drawer dishwasher. Look at visual contrast between the surface and the controls so that if you're looking at silver on black, it's kind of hard to see where the controls are. And if you have a stove, a cooktop, I like to see a cooktop separate from the wall oven because that way you can put them both at a comfortable height that's easy to use. Visual contrast would be, say, a black dials on a white stove or something like that. And also, when you look at light fixtures like this, people can't change the light bulbs. We've been putting in recessed lights for decades, even though they're now LED and you don't have to change them. I'm seeing people who want to put wall sconces everywhere, not to ever have to stand on a chair and change the light bulb.
In terms of one
Final comment.
Okay, final is what's kind of emerging. MIT has some interesting research. They call it enchanted objects. So these are technologically enhanced objects, but they're low-tech in terms of how you interface with it. Very simple examples, for example, it could be a screen you have somewhere in the room, and also your family member has that same screen, and then get closer, they turn on automatically, and it feels seamless how you can talk to your family at a different place. So it's not about pressing buttons, they start to respond to activities. And I think that is also a very interesting trend. It's kind of high-tech with low-tech interface. And there's also an interesting research happening.
Well, great. Well, thank you each for participating today and carrying this conversation forward. We're going to do a quick set change here and transfer for the video.